It's really a great pleasure to be here. I mean, the turnout is really great. So, welcome everyone. My name is Kurzke. I work in the Google Developer Relations team, and specifically I work on Google TV and Android development. So I'm going to give you a quick overview today of where we are with Google TV, and more importantly, how you can develop applications and get your applications published for Google TV. If you want to get a hold of me, the best ways is either on Google+, so you can find me, Christian Kurzke, or I also still use Twitter, so CN Kurzke, or we have a Google TV developer tweet, so it goes out like, I don't know, we try like once every other day. So you can follow us there. We announce news and things relevant to TV developers. We also have a weekly Hangout. So if you follow me on the Google Plus page, we use Google Plus to broadcast a Hangout actually every Wednesday, 1 o'clock Pacific. So it's usually we bring in 1 or 2 of our developers from the actual product team. And if you have any questions or if you have any ideas or anything you want to talk with the team, you're always welcome to stop by the Hangout. It's live, so feel free to ask whatever you want. It's probably the fastest and most direct way to get answers. So what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to talk more in general, why developing for television. And I realize a lot of you are familiar with developing for mobile phones or Android developers. So just curious, how many of you actually are Android developers or have written Android apps? OK. So about half of you. That's pretty good. So then I'm going to show specifically how you can develop for Google TV, how you get started, and then once you have an app, how you get it distributed. So without further ado, one of the questions I want to answer for some of you here is what actually is a TV? And you have to keep in mind there is a world out there while we actually go home and we sit in front of our PCs and we maybe hack some code or something. There's actually people out there who watch television. And sometimes it's really amazing outside Silicon Valley. So some of the statistics is that in the US, an average home has 2.5 people, and it has 2.86 televisions. So there's more TVs than people out there. And also in the US, people watch an average of 5 hours of television per day. Somebody's watching my 4.5 hours or 5. So what this says is there is actually more televisions out there than there is mobile phones. And not every television is a Google TV. As Eric Schmidt said, we're working hard on changing that. But smart televisions are more and more common. So for example, in 2010, over 20% of all TVs sold have some form of internet functionality. And actually, I was just at CES over in Vegas, and walking the show floor last year, 3D was the big thing. Every TV vendor had to have something 3D. This year was actually smart television. So if you walk across the show floor, every major vendor had something to say about how they have smart TVs. And so we expect that by 2014, there is about over 120 million smart TVs sold. So there's a lot of opportunity for developers. So to sum it up, there's a lot of people out there who actually watch television. And people watch a lot of TV. And it's mostly a passive medium. It's not so much people. We've done a lot of field trials, and we talk with people. And we usually watch them, how they approach television. A lot of, I want to say, quote unquote, us, we know what we want to watch, and we want to get to the content quickly. Regular people, when they come home from work, all they want to do is kick back, relax. They just want to be entertained. And that's sometimes a mindset you have to keep in mind when you develop applications. So there is a very different engagement with a television than people have with a personal computer, with a tablet, or their cell phone. And also, TVs are getting smarter every day. So if you look at quote-unquote smart TVs today, of course there's Google TV, but there's other televisions out there that use things like HTML widgets or use some basic integrated applications. So we actually foresee that as usual, Moore's law is going to run its course, and the CPUs and RAM and everything is going to get more powerful. So very soon, every TV will basically be an application platform. And so for developers, I think now is a really good time to sort of get their feet wet and get in the market. And it's going to, I think it's going to go about the same way the mobile application development went. And we're somewhere past the midlets right now. If you remember the first smartphones with J2ME, it was kind of hit and miss. But I think as time goes by, smart TVs will be a really interesting platform for developers. And so anyway, so people spend a lot of time with their television, and I think we should help make better use of this time. So in general, if you look at what you want to develop for television, the one thing that I can say for sure is anything entertainment related is really big for TVs. So go where the money is. I actually reused this slide here from Vegas. And there is big business in entertainment. So what can you do as a developer? So smart TVs give you the opportunity actually to be the center of the living room. If you look at the typical household, you usually have a television set somewhere in the center of the house. The family spends a lot of time when they come home, they turn on the TV and then they sit down, they watch TV. So you can, as a developer, you can enhance the TV watching time, you can add value to it without being too intrusive. So one of the challenges is really striking a balance between overloading the user with too much information that they maybe not want. But I think there is a lot of value that can be added. And the other opportunity is, yes, people watch 5 hours of TV a day, but that means that there is a 40-inch or 60-inch screen idle in the house for 19 hours. So if you can come up with a killer app for the other 19 hours, that is actually really cool. So maybe you don't want to have the TV running at midnight, but if my TV, you know, maybe talks with my alarm clock, comes on in the morning when I get up and it already has the weather report on the TV. That used to be the future, but that's actually possible today. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for apps that we haven't really thought about. I mean, a couple years ago, when people, well, I mean, some people still use like non-smartphones, but when people first started using smartphones, Tetris and whatever tic-tac-toe were sort of the killer apps. Nowadays, people want to have like really immersive, engaging applications. They want to slingshot birds across. So I think we'll see the same progression for TV applications. So we got to start somewhere. We got to sort of figure out what people want to do in their living room. But then I think entertainment in general is going to be a good opportunity for developers. The other thing is, as we say at Google, is know your users or follow your users. So as developers, I really encourage you to sort of figure out who are your users and what do they really want. And you can develop for like people like yourself, but you're probably a lot more successful if you develop for the other 99% of people. So I've sat through a lot of user studies, and it's really amazing to look at TV watching behavior that people have. And my best test is usually when my in-laws come over. If they see a Google TV and I have to explain to them what it does, first couple rounds it was a little painful. Nowadays, I must say, now that we launched the next version, version 2, we made it a lot simpler to use for normal users. And the real idea of Google TV is it wants to get out of the way when you just want to watch TV. But with a single button press, you'll actually get to Google TV. So with that, actually, let me show you quickly how Google TV looks like. I've seen earlier a couple hands up. So some people have a Google TV at home. I actually brought one with me. I can't show you the TV functionality, but I'm just going to give you a quick demo how Google TV looks like to the user. Let's see if, there we go. Okay, so this is what you would normally see, except there would be a movie playing. So we actually pass through the HDMI input. So a typical Google TV setup, you have some cable set-top box or whatever, AT&T, Comcast, pick your favorite carrier, and you loop it through the Google TV. Unlike some of the other things, you don't need to switch inputs or anything, but you can just press the home button and it brings up the Google TV menu at the bottom. If you have used any of the tablets, it looks very much like a Honeycomb tablet. It also has a little bit of ice cream sandwichy feel to it with the launcher bar in the bottom. And you can pick some of your favorite applications. And for users who are, I want to say for advanced users, you can configure all of the home screen here. So you could, of course, customize which apps are there. You could customize the home screen. But your average user, they will probably just launch some of the apps that are pre-installed. Or you can launch Google Chrome. It has a full Chrome browser. You can surf the web. So that's sort of the default that we expect. I mean, that's sort of the minimum functionality. You can't really sell a smart TV without it. The challenge is, as you see here already, using it with one hand, maybe having your soda in the other or a microphone, it's pretty hard to navigate a website that's sort of just regular website. So for web developers, what we actually recommend is you can also take advantage of Smart TV. You can optimize your websites. And we have a couple optimized websites here, and I'll talk about that in my talk later, who have just used regular HTML, HTML5, and they have created TV-specific experiences for their website. So let's see. Actually, Crackle is a nice one. So Crackle is a video site, and they have created more of a living room look and feel of their website that you can actually use with just your remote control. You don't actually need a mouse cursor for that. So this is one opportunity for people who are HTML developers. You can just optimize your website and give it a TV look and feel. Sorry? Whoops. Oh, crap. See, I'm not looking what I pick here. OK, we'll back out of that. Good thing is it takes forever to load. So anyways, I don't really want to waste too much time on the websites. That's something for web developers. So I'm an Android kind of guy. So the good news is we also have the Android market, and you can install all kinds of apps from the Android market. And so for the rest of the talk, I'll show you a couple of considerations what you should have when you develop an Android app. One other thing, if I had a set-top box right now here, one thing that Google TV does is it integrates with your set-top box, and it actually allows you to browse for content. This one here, since it was paired with my set-top box at home, it knows what movies I have, it knows what's currently on TV. So I could very easily change programs, or I could find things that are interesting to me. So this is one of the advantages. People always, sometimes they ask questions like, what is really Google TV versus just running Android on a large screen? And so this would be the equivalent of like a Google-specific application that we wrote that is available on Google TV. So also, one thing that we can do is if you search for content, let me just search for, say, Office. That should be safe. So, so here I find, for example, that for The Office there is a couple of seasons available. I can look at, say, season 1, and I can, for example, buy season 1 either on Amazon or on Netflix. And so as we go along, there is, of course, an opportunity for VOD providers to add to this here. So as an Android developer, basically, this is an Android application. So this is sort of what I consider the gold standard for usability and for user interface, what your app should look like. Notice I don't need the mouse cursor or anything. It's all D-pad navigable. So that's basically what Google TV looks like. So now let's see how you can actually create applications for this. All right, so how do we develop for this? So from a developer's point of view, Google TV, it's basically a Chrome browser, and it's an Android runtime. And I've already shown you some examples for Chrome web-optimized applications. It's a full Chrome desktop browser. So yes, it does have Flash. It's Chrome 11. So for web developers, you'll know it does some of the HTML5. You may have to, basically you can just develop against the Chrome 11 desktop version. And it allows you to create TV optimized web experiences. As I always say, just showing a web page on a TV does not make it TV optimized. Trying to hit the links with your mouse cursor from your couch is pretty annoying. So this is not TV optimized. And here I have some cute little kittens. So this is TV optimized. So this is just an example of the YouTube web page. And what we did is basically when we detect the connection comes in from a Google TV browser, we just give the user a choice and say, hey, do you want the TV optimized or do you want the standard desktop version? You can actually try this out if you just at home go to your Google Chrome browser and you just go to youtube.com/leanback. You actually get the same experience. So as I said, we have what we call the Web App Spotlight. It's a gallery of websites that we want to highlight from developers who have created some really cool web or TV experiences on their website. And you can just go to gtvgallery.appspot.com to find that. But for the rest of the talk, really, Google TV is all about Android. And the reason is, when you develop for Google TV and you're an Android developer, you're pretty familiar with the existing system. There's really not much secret sauce to it. So Android gives you the deep integration with the system. It's a familiar programming language, and it has familiar APIs. So Google TV supports basically standard Honeycomb 3.1 or API level 12 Android APIs. And there is a few more things that I'll talk about at the end, which are Google TV specific. I don't really want to call them APIs, but it's just using Android APIs suitable for the television. The one thing I want to highlight is, again, developing for Google TV. It's not just a big screen Android device. So I've seen a lot of developers who take a tablet application and run it on a TV, and most of the time it sort of kind of works, but it's never a really perfect optimized experience. What we really think what makes a great Android application for Google TV is optimized UI for sort of a 10-foot viewing distance, lean back with a remote control. And yeah, the input device, like you don't want any touch inputs. And also, the other thing that you can take advantage of is Google TV has a lot of optimized media codecs. So we actually have hardware-accelerated MPEG playback for MP4 files. We have sound support for anything up to, I think it's 5.1 Dolby Surround. So we do HTTP live streaming for adaptive bitrate streaming. So there is a lot of codecs that if you develop for a tablet, you don't necessarily have, but you also don't need, because the tablet, it's a much smaller screen real estate, and nobody really expects Blu-ray quality video playback from a tablet. So with that said, I personally think the UI design is probably one of the biggest differentiators for developers. And as a user, one thing that you have to keep in mind is TV viewers have what I call an unreasonable expectation on screen polish. If you just watch your favorite game show in the afternoon, every time there is like, I don't know, name badges coming in or somebody has like text on the screen, it's not just a 12-point Helvetica. It has drop shadows, it has reflection, it has CGI rendering. The stuff is like flying in from the side, exploding in the middle of the screen. Just watching your favorite sports or weather or any of the other news channels, you'll see a lot of high polish video and high polish UI. If people then switch to your app and you have a list view with like Droid Sans 10 point, it looks pretty sad. So again, UI design is one of my pet peeves here. So when you design your UI, really focus on what's vital for your application. in the living room, people don't want to spend a lot of time trying to learn your application. People have a very short attention span. They have very little patience when it comes to their television. Usually they want to get something done quickly. One of my examples is if you write a music player or media player or anything, don't make people press 7 or 8 clicks to get to the first piece of content. If you have something like, say, music on demand, just start playing something. Either save a playlist from where they last left off and just keep playing from last time, or just play whatever favorite hits of the day or something. Just make sure the user feels they started your app, something is happening. Even if they have to, whatever, click through and maybe choose a new piece of music, you can maybe entertain them in the background with something. Then group together controls, interactions, and do progressive disclosure. We have a tendency, especially on tablets, to show a lot of stuff on the screen. And Android gives you a lot of really cool layout mechanisms with fragments. You can show a lot of UI elements on the screen. Again, watch some of the professional TV shows and newscasts, and you'll see that people really focus on a few keywords. You don't want to read paragraphs of text on a screen. So focus on the essential, throw out the non-essential. Multiple screens, basically instead of putting everything on the same screen, just progressively disclose more and more information as users drill down deeper. And from a technical point of view, look into 9-patch images. TVs are really big screens, and if your assets are non-scalable and you have fixed size rendered buttons and you bring a lot of them, your app gets very large very quickly, and it actually doesn't look very good. And lastly, as I said, TVs, really high UI expectation. You may be an excellent coder. Chances are you're not a very excellent UI designer. So maybe get somebody who freelances, or find somebody who can do part-time in some UI design for you. Actually, one of the poor examples, or one of the bad examples is, if your app looks like that, it's probably not a good idea. So I think this is bad UI design. So here's what you should do. You should have a dark background. So you may have noticed earlier, and the lights in here are actually pretty bright, but imagine you sit in your living room, the Chrome browser comes up, there's a white background, there's dark font on it. It's very disruptive for a living room. Also the background, having just a single color, people are used to things like blends or some sort of rendering stuff. So having a background image makes your app look already twice as expensive and sophisticated. And it's some simple, really simple tricks sometimes. So have some dark backgrounds, use bold fonts. People don't want to pull out their reading glasses. It's like, think about the demographics of viewers that you have. Most of them cannot read a 5-point font or a 10-point font when they're sitting 10 feet away. And keep the lines short and increase the line spacing. So this would be about as much information as people can process on their TV screen when they're sitting there at 10 o'clock at night and maybe had a pizza and a beer. If you want more information, you can actually go to developers.google.com/TV. So this is a URL that's just in general good to write down, or you can find us on Google. We have a UI design guide, and we have some of our UI designers, they wrote up some of the lessons learned that we had from user trial and user feedback developing Android apps. Okay, so now that I've convinced you, you want to actually spend some time to create a polished app. Let's see what you can do. So one of the things that I keep talking about is comparing an Android app between phone, tablet, and TV. Yes, technically you can write an app that runs on all platforms, and sometimes that really makes sense, but keep in mind the UIs are slightly different. Your phone is a very different UI mode. You're very close, you have a touch screen. It's more personal also. Your tablet has actually a lot of real estate, and even though your TV screen is much larger, don't kind of keep drawing the curve. Don't put as much information on your TV as you would put on your tablet. When I work with developers, what I actually recommend is if you already have a if you already have a phone layout and you have a tablet layout, your TV layout, chances are, is closer to your phone layout than your tablet layout. If you just put a tablet app on TV, it actually doesn't work as well. Especially the other reason is people on tablets frequently use gestures, swipe, rotate, pinch, zoom, whatever. All that doesn't work on TV. You'll be in for a world of hurt if you try to convert all those gestures on TV. People will not like the user interface. So if you look at basically information per square inch, I would say the TV is somewhere between tablets and mobile phones. So the other thing to keep in mind as a developer, as I said earlier, we want high polish. We want your apps to look really good, but keep really in mind the memory consumption. So as developers, if you, for example, just want to have a background image and say your graphics designers, they whipped out Photoshop and they made this really fancy, brilliant looking, great background, chances are if you tell them it's for TV, they will give you something with about 1900 pixels by 1080 pixels. And what this means is if you look at the curve here, a full screen background for something like an HVGA device, which is sort of the low-end Android phone, it's ½ megabyte, not a big deal. For something like a high-resolution WVGA, it's 1.5 megabyte, still not a big deal. Tablet, okay, we're talking 4 megabytes. It's starting to hurt. On a TV, a full screen background takes up 8 megabytes. At that point, you really should think about how many background images you need, and do you really need one full screen, or can you maybe composite something at runtime? One of the things to also keep in mind is, and this is a topic I'll talk a little bit more about later, if you stretch an image, or if you just barely stretch an image to fit the background, keep in mind Android actually keeps the unmodified and the stretched image in memory. So if you have, say, a 6 megabyte picture and you stretch it to a full screen background, now you're using 6 megabyte plus the stretched version, 8 megabytes. We're talking 14 megabytes. So you're starting to run out of heap space. So let's look at some of, and this is actually just simple UI. So this is an image viewer that we wrote, and it's just a simple example of a grid layout, and it has some options on the side. And you'll notice it's square, and we've sort of gotten used to that screens are square on our desktop, on our phone, on our tablet. One of the topics I want to talk about is that when you look at an old-fashioned TV, TV screens were not always square, and believe it or not, this is still haunting us today. So I'll explain in a second why. So the problem is basically square images and round screens. And if you're on a really bad TV, something like this could happen. This is a little bit exaggerated, but not much. So keep in mind, televisions are not computer monitors. If you sit on your monitor and you read on your box what resolution your monitor has, you can pretty much count on that every single pixel is there, and if it's not there, you can return it. If you buy an HD television, even if you pay a couple $1,000s, I can almost guarantee you that not every single pixel on the screen is really visible. There is things like the aluminum bezel is overlapping something, there's manufacturing tolerances, and then somebody might just have gotten a good deal on a LCD panel that's like 5% smaller. So what we find is most televisions don't display the exact number of pixels on the screen that HD TV, or basically the 1080p standard, technically it's 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Not all TVs will display that. About 20% will, but the other 80% won't. So when you actually set up a Google TV device, we calibrate the screen size to what's visible. If you watch, say, your local news channel or watch any sports channel, you'll notice that they never put something all the way on the border. They always leave a couple pixels. And there is, if you look up on Wikipedia for overscan, there is usually a 5% margin that people don't use. And if you watch an action movie and they cut off like couple outer edges, nobody cares. If it's your UI and you're cutting off one of the navigation buttons, people will really miss it. So technically speaking, TVs don't display a border of anywhere between 5 to 10%. What we do is, as I said, we compensate for it, but what that means for you as a developer, you have to scale to basically the output. So if you write an Android app, you can't rely on your background canvas always to be exactly 1080p resolution. And that goes back to the background image. Now, if you have a full screen background image, you actually have to scale it slightly by 5%, and now your memory footprint basically doubles. The other problem is, this is actually not even what happens. So the problem, what happens is on Google TV, after we calibrate, and you have basically the upper left corner will be visible, but we will cut everything on the right and everything on the bottom to make sure it fits on the screen. So for an Android developer, if you really, basically if you create fixed size layouts, you may actually end up clipping to the right and to the bottom, and it's ugly. So what you should do is, and we keep telling about this all the time, when you develop an Android app, don't have any fixed assumptions on screen size. If you develop for mobile phones, you've probably by now realized there's more than one screen size. You have a development phone. Most everybody else will have a different phone, and it will be slightly different. It started back in the days when we had the Droid and the Nexus S, the Nexus 1, and I think one was 800 by 480, the other one was 851 by 480. So those 51 pixels were, well, sometimes people notice. But so the reason is for Android, just create dynamic layouts, use things like grid layouts, use things with basically relative layouts. If you use gravity, you use all of the mechanisms that we have in the XML layouts. You can easily create layouts that float automatically and that adapt to the different screen sizes. But if you hard code and you use absolute layout, which is deprecated anyways, then you may run into problems. So this is just one more reason to really learn about the layout management and actually use it. Okay, so this was the screen. Now let's take a look at the remote control. So this thing is also different from your regular, from your touch screen. And if you look at an application, and people who create Android apps today, they'll know that most of the time people will use it with just a touch screen. And no matter what you do, you implicitly rely on a touch screen. So this is a grid layout here, and if you, for example, use this on a tablet, you would just touch whichever grid or whichever cell you want to interact with. And as a developer, you don't need to worry about things like focus states. Is it highlighted? Is it active? Is it navigable? And so on. If you navigate this with a remote control, you actually have to do left, left, down, down, over, and so on to navigate on this grid. So a couple things for developers to keep in mind. First of all, laying things out in a grid is usually a good idea. I've tried to use things like map views, where there is map pins that are seemingly random over the map. It's always difficult to navigate map pins with a D-pad because it's never quite clear if you go left or right. Do you want to go to the nearest one left, or do you really want to go to the closest left? How much should the focus jump around? It gets really tricky. With grids, much easier. So if you can, stick with a grid. The other thing you notice here is there is actually a grid in the middle, and then there is the menu bar on the side. So in this case here, say if a user has focus highlight on this cell here, and then presses the down key, so the question is, what should happen? And there's actually not a simple answer to this. So the most likely scenario that you would have guessed is you're here, you go down, you probably want to end up down there. It makes sense to us as humans. To computers, maybe not. So another choice would have been you go down. Well, the next cell down from here is actually all the way over to the side. So the focus would jump from here over to the navigation bar. For a user, this is confusing. They look at the screen and they're like, what just happened? Where did my focus go? The other thing that could have happened, by the way, depending on how you design the layout, is the computer could have also said, okay, I'm basically in this block here. I'm going down. Okay, there's another list. I'm just going to go to the first element in this list. And you could have also ended up there. So where you end up, and there's a few more possibilities that could have happened, by the way, but where you end up, ultimately, there is an Android default focus handling, and depending on how your layouts are cascaded and how they're boxed in each other, you may end up with desirable or entirely stupid ways. So the good news is you can actually, as a developer, override this. And I think for normal applications, focus handling, the default focus handling makes sense most of the time. For TV applications where the D-pad navigation is really your primary input mechanism, defining your own focus order and making sure you tested this and actually maybe try out a couple different layouts makes really sense. The other thing is, make sure you understand what is the most likely operation that a user wants to do next, and maybe move your focus, your default focus highlight there, so that users don't always have to navigate through the entire screen if all they want is most likely they just press next or OK. So, okay, so now we have the screen, we have the remote control. Let's look at sound. Sure. Okay, so the question was, if you have horizontal lists, you could use a gallery widget for that, which, yeah, I know. So for some of those, we actually wrote our own layout management. The one thing that I find is, if you have horizontal scrolling, yeah, I think the gallery ones, they work for basic look and feel. If you want something better, you have to write your own. So, okay, so now let's talk about sound. So one of the other things that's important in the living room is actually sound output. And one of the things is, if you look at mobile applications, people frequently use things like the haptic feedback, the vibrate mechanism. On a television, sound is a lot more useful, and vibrate doesn't work anyways. So we have a lot of apps that use sound output. You also have a lot of multimedia apps, things like Pandora, Napster, playing music in the background. One of the things that you should do if you have a Google TV app is make sure you read up on the sound focus, or basically the audio manager. So when your app wants to play back sound, make sure you request audio focus. And that's a signal to the platform that everybody else should mute their sound. There is nothing more confusing on a TV than having multiple apps outputting sound at the same time. And we've had cases where apps that were not so well behaved and they would just keep playing music in the background. People would then switch to live television and they are confused because there is different audio soundtrack over the live TV. And yeah, so that sometimes actually even leads to customer service calls, as our OEMs keep telling us. So as a developer, request sound focus. And there's a little code snippet here. Basically, all you need to do is use the audio manager and check if you have sound focus. And then you can also, conversely, of course, you should respect audio focus. So if you are an app that plays in the background and that plays audio, make sure that you actually implement the focus change listener so that if another app requests audio focus, you actually give it up and you give somebody else a chance to play back audio. So a couple more random goodies. And so those are not Google TV specific APIs per se, but it's just using Android APIs specifically for Google TV. So one of the frequently used things is location. A lot of apps use location, especially mobile apps. What we do is we don't have a GPS, so we don't really know exactly where we are. But when you set up a Google TV device, you typically enter a zip code. And what we do is we convert the zip code to a course location. And you can get a location provider. And you can actually use the provider name static. So if you request the known location from a static provider, you will get the zip code where your TV was set up. This should be good enough to, for example, give you things like weather forecast or local news or anything. Okay, so the question is there a way to get more fine-grained location information, basically a street address or something? No, you cannot override the system location provider, but in your app, if you want to, you could ask the user for their exact address, and you can do something with that. We've heard people ask for other stuff, like using basically the Wi-Fi triangulation or anything. We're not doing any of that right now, and I say, yeah, it's a nice feature. We should add that somewhere to our to-do list, but hasn't made it from our engineering team yet. So the next feature is channel listings and channel changing. So this is another frequent request from developers. And before I explain what it does, I explain what it does not do. So it does not tell you what the user is watching. It does also not tell you what show is currently on which channel. So what it does is we have a content provider. The content provider gives you a list of channels that are currently available on this set-top box. And if you're familiar with the way channel lineups work here, it's very regional. Some places have whatever, CNN East Coast, CNN West Coast, sports channels, and so on, depending on what your package is. So it's useful information in that when we set up a set-top box, we figure out what channels you have. As an app developer, you can basically get the available channels. So you could switch to a channel. What does it mean to switch to a channel? Okay, so in those channel listings, we have a channel URI as one of the fields. So this TV URI, you can take the URI and you can send just a regular Android intent with that URI. And then this will, as Android intents do, it will go to the TV viewing application or TV viewing activity, and it will switch channel, and then the TV viewer will take over the application. So the useful or the use case for that would be if you have an app and you have a button to tune to whatever weather channel, you could iterate through. You could first of all find out if the user has subscribed to the weather channel, and if they do, then you can send out an intent, and then your app goes in the background and the weather channel comes up. One of the other things Google TV does not have right now, and I know the question is going to come in Q&A later, so I'll just answer it. You can't overlay from your Android app on top of the running video output. So that's another API that we don't have yet. So let's look at a couple real-world examples.
And I take it that you cannot tunnel the video into a window.
There is no API for that. So the question is it possible to take the video signal and embed it into your Android application effectively? So that would be basically like you have a video view today where you can just stream video to it. There is no official API for that. Some of the apps have figured out how to do that, but
So there is one, it's not official.
So it has to do with a video view and a special URL. So the reason we don't make it official is it's not something that we feel confident gives all the functionality. So for example, you can't change channels that way very easily. And it's not something that we want to guarantee for backward compatibility. So if somebody wants to experiment, I'm sure you can find some references to it. But I would really not recommend use that in an application, because we are not guaranteeing that that will work in the future for the next upgrades. So this is an example here of basically a mobile app. And just again, from a UI point of view, this is the Pandora mobile app, and this is the Pandora Google TV app. All I wanted to highlight is it looks very similar. It was pretty easy port, actually. One of the bigger problems was making sure all the UI elements are useful with the D-pad, and it also uses the fast forward rewind buttons on the D-pad. So another app we worked on was CNBC. They have a website, they have a mobile app, and what they did is they created an app with actually an embedded video view. So this is not the broadcast view here, so they actually IP stream basically the highlights and segments of the program today. And it allows you to personalize which stocks you're interested in. And if for the stocks that you're interested in, there is a video, then you will be able to actually view the video over IP, and it shows the video view in the app. So this app has a tune to CNBC TV, and if you happen to have CNBC TV, you can just go tune to the live channel there. So how do you get started with your own app? So what you actually really need is the Android SDK, and you can use the 3.1 or the 3.2, they're pretty equivalent for this purpose, SDK. Just use one of the Honeycomb SDKs. There is some misconception out there that people say you need a Linux machine. That's really not the case. You can use any development machine. You can use Macs, you can use Windows. The only thing that you need a Linux machine for is to run the emulator. And that's because we use KVM, and it's a long, drawn-out technical discussion, but just believe me, it really doesn't work well on Windows or Mac. It's pretty snappy, actually, on Linux, so that's why we didn't make it available for Windows or for Macs yet. But for developers, I mean, if you're really serious about developing a Google TV app, you can get pretty far with just the emulator, but in the end you need a real Google TV box just for things like overscan, just to do your user testing and so on. So my recommendation is using an emulator is useful for some things. It's good on a desktop. It's nice when you can just prototype something quickly. But for actual development, I always have a Google TV box with me.
Where do you get one?
The Logitech reviews are...
I thought that's end of line.
Well, they're still available.
Or maybe buy a brand new TV.
Or buy a brand new TV.
But they're not available.
Yeah.
How do you connect your computer to?
So, so how do we connect the computer to the Google TV? So for phones, you use the USB cable, and for Google TV, we don't use USB, we actually go over IP. So if you are familiar with the Android tools, there is ADB. It's a simple ADB command, it's ADB connect, and then the IP address, and then you can connect to it. The TV IP address you just get from the TV. So there is in the settings, you can just figure out what IP address it's connected to. There is one other little caveat. If you do that, then you will actually it will not work. What you need to also do is you need to go to Google TV, enable debugging, and you need to set the IP address of your host machine. And that's basically, they have to know each other. So it's sort of a security feature. We don't want your neighbors to debug your TV just because they're on the same network. So you have to enter your host machine in the Google TV so it's trusted as a development machine. So the question is, if you have multiple computers you use to develop, can you configure all of them? Right now it's one at a time. It's actually an interesting requirement. I'll bring that back to our engineers. So the other thing is, of course, if you're an Android developer you're familiar with, there is all the Eclipse tools. Basically, you just set up for regular Android development. So if you develop for Google TV, some of the tricks that I've used over time is you can actually use a Honeycomb tablet. So if you don't have a Google TV, but you happen to have a Google, like a Zoom or any of the Honeycomb tablets laying around, you can actually pair a Bluetooth keyboard with your tablet, and you can test things like the focus, navigation, and you can also test what your UI looks like on a large screen device. The emulator, of course, for Linux workstations, you can use that for screen sizes, and you can also configure it with odd screen sizes, so you can see what does it look like 5% smaller, 10% smaller, or ultimately get a real device. The Sony Blu-ray player, the Logitech Review. Yeah. I've actually been told we are looking into like sending out an email later. What we do is we have what we call our fish tank program, where we basically have people sign up and you give us an app idea, you say what you're working on, and we give it to our business development folks. If you have a track record as like a real Android developer, you have maybe an app in the market, you're seriously working on a Google TV app, we don't want to have the lack of physical hardware stop you. So we've been known to give out Google TV boxes for that.
How do you sign up?
We'll send out an email to the list of people here. So, okay, so the documentation, it's all for Android, it's the usual spot, it's developer.android.com. For Google TV, it's developers, notice the S, .google.com/TV. You can also get there if you just go to google.com/TV and then follow the links for developers. So, okay, so now you've created your app, you have made sure it's well polished. The next question is, how do you get it there? So this is Market running on Google TV. And what I want to highlight is, so this is not like a super special, super secret new market. This is the regular Android market. It's one market. You don't need to upload it in multiple places. The people, when they go to the Android market on Google TV, they will notice that maybe their favorite application is not quite there yet. So then tell your developers of your favorite application to come and work with us. How do we decide what shows up here is based on device features. So as Android developers, you're probably familiar with device features. So in your application manifest, you can specify which features are required by your application to run. And that's stuff like if your application, say, requires a camera, it doesn't make sense to run on a device that does not have a camera. If it requires a GPS, again, it doesn't make sense to run on a device that does not have GPS. The one key feature is really touchscreen. I'll talk about that in a little while. But basically, this is a list of features that are supported by Google TV. If your application does not require any other features than those, it will show up in the market and it will run on Google TV. One of the features that is not on the list is the Android.hardware.touchscreen. So since most devices, or basically all devices before Google TV had a touchscreen, the assumption is that every Android application out there requires a touchscreen, unless you declare otherwise. So if you have in your application manifest, if you have no mention of a touchscreen, market assumes you need a touchscreen, because otherwise he would have said otherwise, and it will actually filter you out when you browse the market on Google TV. So what you want to do is, if you want to show up on market for Google TV, then you add the Android.hardware touchscreen required equals false statement in your manifest. So this is quote unquote the opt-in for market on Google TV. What you can do is, if you actually set the touchscreen flag for false, that means your app will show up on Google TV. It will also show up on all the other devices, since we assume that even if you have a touchscreen, you can run apps that don't require a touchscreen. So technically now you have an app that runs on all Android devices, again, minus all the other constraints, screen size, and other features that you may have. So what you can do now is at runtime, you can actually use the package manager, and you can use a runtime query to check for the com.google.android.tv feature. And so the use case you had earlier, you could at runtime make a distinction and figure out, okay, I'm running on a TV, maybe I'm doing something slightly different than if I'm running on a tablet. The other thing you could do is, if you only want to create an app that is only available on Google TV, maybe because you have a very specialized user interface, then you can require the com.google.android.tv feature. And with this feature required, your app will only show up on Google TV devices. So these are basically the two main flags. So it's the Android.tv flag, and it's the hardware.touchscreen flag. So yeah, so this is basically, if you only show up on Google TV, then you set the Google TV feature to true. I get frequent emails from people who upload an APK and then send us, the business team or somebody, a panic email saying, oh my God, my app doesn't show up. What did I do wrong? Just do yourself a favor. Before you upload your app to the market, use AAPT. It's a tool that comes with the Android SDK, and it will actually dump out the list of features, and it will dump out basically all the things that Android Market sees. Actually, Android Market uses AAPT to ingest an application. So when you use AAPT, the parameters are dump badging and then your application name. It will actually print out a list of features that are required, print out a list of features that are not required. Some of the things that you should watch out for is, as I said earlier, Google TV, for example, it does not have a camera. But that doesn't mean you couldn't write an app that uses a camera on, say, a tablet, but does not use a camera on Google TV. You're probably all familiar, Android has a concept of permissions. So if you want to use a camera, you declare the camera permission as required, and the system will automatically assume that you need a camera. But you can also declare the camera feature as not required, and then you say, okay, I need the permission, but I don't need the feature. This makes the camera, quote unquote, optional. And so AAPT will go through all of the permissions, and it will do all the implicit features, and it will do all the inference. So I've had some apps that, for example, ended up using GPS or using some of the features that were not available. So AAPT is really useful for that. Also, before you upload your app to the market, go test it on a bunch of different TVs. Test it also on small screen TVs. As I said earlier, the overscan settings, when you have a Google TV box, you go to the menu and there is screen size, and you can actually manually set the screen size for minimum and maximum overscan. And you can actually try some of the settings out and see how your application would look on TVs that have large overscan margins versus small overscan margins. Lastly, if you do upload to market, include a 16:9 screenshot. It looks really good if your app actually runs on Google TV to show it in your screenshots. Include a feature graphic. A lot of people leave that out. And let us know. Come to our Hangout, tweet about it, send me something on Google+. We're seriously always looking for the next great application on Google TV. Yeah? Yeah, so the question is there like anything that's against terms of service for developers? So I think in order to distribute in the Android market, there's the Android market terms of service in terms of content appropriateness and so on.
Yeah, I mean,
so how do we distribute an HTML5 app for Google TV? So the primary discovery and distribution is through the Android market. So some of the people, they have been successful using HTML5 packaged in an Android app, and you can then kick off a web view and you can render it in a web view. Okay, let me just explain a little bit more. So I think the question goes along Chrome versus web view versus things like PhoneGap. So the Google TV stack, it has a full Chrome browser. If you run an Android app, you can open up the Chrome browser and you can send it to a URL, open up a URL, and you basically can then browse any web app or any HTML5 site. The problem is it's not as integrated as an experience as an Android app. So at that point, for example, the user, when they press the back key or the menu key, they get to the Chrome browser menu or they get to the regular back stack of the Chrome pages. I think it's possible. We have a bunch of apps that actually do that. My preference would be to stick within a web view in Android because you have a lot tighter control of what, for example, happens when the user presses the search key, what happens when the user presses the menu key, and so on. Okay, so just a couple more words about monetization. I know everybody needs to make money. So how can you make money? Very easy. It's the same as regular Android. You can have, in the Android market, you can have paid apps. You can have in-app billing, or what we call freemium. So for those two models, what we find increasingly when we look at the statistics and we talk with developers, it's a lot easier to make money when users are already familiar with your app. The in-app payment usually works very well, and especially for content, things like renting movies, upgrading content works really well. Or you can have subscription-based, or you can have advertisement-based. But I think it's basically the same as in Android. If you have an app, you have a monetization strategy for Android, you can use the same ways. We have, of course, full support for Google Checkout, so you can use the regular mechanisms that are also available in Android. Yes? It's amazing. I'm still getting a paycheck. So, so I think Google TV is, I mean, it's one of those things where people had very high expectations based on Android. I think people are more reluctant buying new televisions than they are buying handsets, buying phones. So I think it's not realistic to measure the success compared to how many Android handsets we're selling. I think when I look, honestly, when I was walking through CES this year, I was very pleasantly surprised at, last year I had to constantly explain what is Google TV. This year, everybody knew about Google TV, and people were excited about it. People wanted to get onto it. So yes, of course, I would love to have Google TV running on every single device today, but I think we're doing pretty well. There's definitely a commitment behind it. I mean, we know that this is a long process. We can't change the way that people watch TV, or we can't like update every TV immediately. So I think for developers, the opportunity is, even if it's a smaller market right now, having an app that really stands out gives you an opportunity to actually really build a brand early. I've heard a lot of developers, and you read about developers who were early in the mobile market and who maybe had I don't know, one guy, I think he was blogging recently, he had something like a Sudoku game or something. He made close to 100K the first year he published it. Yeah, he does not make 100K anymore, because if he publishes the next whatever Sudoku version, there is now 5 dozens out there. So if you go into the Google TV market, even if there is a smaller total install base compared to mobile, it gives you a smaller market and a better discoverability. So I think it's, yeah, I put stickers on it. So yeah, I must agree that this is not the most pleasant thing to have on your couch at home. It's really nice for nerds, but for normal people, they look at this and they don't know what to do with it. We know this is one of the sticky points, and we as Google, I mean, we're not in the hardware business. We trust on our OEMs to know what people want to do in the living room. Logitech, let's just say their track record for the living room, I don't know it. So I trust, I mean, if you look at the Sony remote, it looks a lot more like something you want to have in the living room. So we actually have a Google TV remote control app. So for both iPhone and Android, and you can just use your Android phone or your iPhone, and you can control your Google TV with it. Funny you should say that. One of our guys is actually working on that. So the question was multi-screen apps, and I think that's definitely a really hot topic, is how can you, because everybody has a smartphone nowadays, so how can you tie together a smartphone and a smart TV? And just for reference, there is a company out there that's really very active on it. The company is called Movil, M-O-V-I-L. Yeah, so they're actually using Flash for it, and they connect over the cloud, and basically it's a poker game where you have your poker cards on your handset and then you deal out. So it's an interesting use case. Yes, it's not an Android. We're actually, one of our guys is working on an app right now that we hopefully open source sometime soon.